Kieslowski was born in Warsaw in June of 1941, and he had a very peripatetic childhood because his father had tuberculosis. He was a civil engineer. The family had to travel a lot for medical treatment. His mother was an office worker, so he and his sister and the parents, by the time that Kieslowski was 14 years old, had moved 40 times. And he once told an interviewer that this was a very good formation for a filmmaker because it made him really curious about the world.
Krzysztof also had poor lungs himself, which meant that he had quite a lot of time off school at various points in his life. And that's when he discovered books. He, rather than go out, he would read a lot. And he always said that that's what taught him that there was something more to the world than just what you can buy in the shops.
According to Kieslowski, he never really had a vocation to be a film artist. It's not like one day as a child or even a young man he said, oh, I'm going to be a filmmaker. He kind of fell into it by accident. He really didn't know what he wanted to be when he grew up, but because a distant uncle ran a school for theater technicians, that's why he ended up going to that school. And he once acknowledged at the New York Film Festival press conference for Red that had his relative been a banker, he might have ended up in banking. And because at the time, in order to be in that theater school for technicians, you had to have some sort of advanced degree, he applied to the Lodz Film School as a kind of corollary in what was going to be a career as a theater director. Because he was rejected the first time when he applied to the Lodz Film School, kind of made him angry, and he decided to reapply a year later, partly out of pique, not really desire. And he was rejected a second time. But after all, this was the film school that had been training Andrzej Wajda, Roman Polanski, just before Kieslowski was applying. And apparently, by the time that he could have applied a third round, he decided he had to get in. He was so angry that they rejected him that by now it was a calling of sorts. He was accepted on the third try.
The school was sort of the island of freedom, first of all, you know. We got a very open-minded professors. And somehow the communists accept the fact that, you know, this different place, because they very often, if they have some guests from abroad, they used to invite them to the schools, showing, you know, how open-minded society they have, which was, not, of course, not true.
Only at the Lodz Film School could you, for example, see American movies. Only at the Lodz Film School could you have guest speakers from other countries who gave you a completely more open perspective on what life was about.
The heritage of Polanski and Frykowski, all these guys who've been very intelligent, was driving very young the sport cars, which in the communist Poland was a kind of the extravagance, and had the white fur coats, you know, and a lot of girlfriends. And it was something so strange to me that I didn't believe that I can find the friends among these people. Actually, of course, it was a kind of the cliché, and Krzysztof certainly, and his generation of his friends were completely different. They were really the people who are deeply interested in social issues and in political issues, and understood the filmmaking as a kind of the duty toward the society, which probably also was an effect of the experience of 68.
When the anti-Semitic and anti-intellectual purges of 1968 took place in Poland, the Lodz Film School was the first place they went to. They fired a lot of the professors. At the time, the film school was run by Jerzy Teplitz, who was Jewish. Alexander Ford had been the head of the film school at one point. They went into exile. I mean, they had to leave.
There was a certain amount of sort of illicit activity went on. There was something known as a flying university, where, you know, people would meet to discuss politics and art and whatever.
He said he participated in just one demonstration around 68, and it was on behalf of his suddenly ostracized Jewish friends. They shouted slogans like, I will still have Jewish relations after the communists are gone, you know. But he said that he became increasingly cynical because that kind of demonstration, what good did it do? None. Nothing changed at that moment in time. And he basically veered away from anything that could be termed explicitly political to something that I would term inherently political, namely the documenting of ordinary Polish reality in order to acknowledge all that is missing from Polish life.
Our pictures were fully subsidized, you know. You can't make the picture without the government help. So open critic was simply impossible. You may try, but it's mean your picture is being put on the shelf.
Initially, he made a lot of short documentaries, things like Hospital, which documents the way that doctors have absolutely no breaks, no time to relax on their insane shifts. He made a film called Railway Station, which shows you the group of people desperately waiting finally for their train to come because it's been delayed and delayed. And when it finally comes, this mass of people runs for the doors and you know that there are not going to be enough seats. In other words, he addressed a concrete, bleak reality that was unlike what could have been seen on Polish screens before.
But actually, of course, he after a while decided that he should get out of documentary because you couldn't get close enough to people. If you did get close enough to find out about what made them tick, then you were actually being intrusive. And he didn't want to make films of people crying about their grief or whatever. He didn't want to ask questions about their misery. So he decided to start working with actors. He felt he could get closer to the truth by fiction.
And then, you know, we started to make the future films in the similar periods. And we organized a lot of things together. And we are traveling together quite often to the different meetings with the audience in Poland or to the festivals abroad. And I think that during these travels, our friendship really was born.
Kieslowski learned a lot about the nature of fiction, you know. He brought all his experience from documentary world, and slowly, step by step, he realized, you know, the certain links he had to the documentary world, maybe not so helpful for the certain subject.
I have to tell you that 70s was probably the best period of my life in terms of the solidarity and friendship with another fellow filmmakers. And what was very, I think, unique in Poland in this time, that all good and interesting filmmakers became quite faithful and quite sincere friends. And we met privately, but we met also in the work, and we help each other without any kind of the credits or something.
As a matter of fact, he was the one who established a very nice habit. Whenever we finish our first movie or first assemble, first draft, there was a group of the friends we used to invite for the first screening, and not as an audience, you know. It was a sort of our sneaking preview, you know. We are trying to help each other, you know. So probably because of his influence, it was not so big competition between all of us, you know. It was a group of people who use and they try to help each other.
And we are really interested about each other, you know. It was also a lot of the tolerance and openness in terms of accepting somebody's criticism. I was submitting my work to Krzysztof Kieslowski, always to Wajda, also to Zanussi, sometimes to another friend, Edward Żebrowski, and so. And sometimes the critics were quite brutal, but I always knew that it is for the best of the film, that they really tell me what they believe is right.
There was such a collaborative spirit on all of Kieslowski's films, from the early days to the end, and the same people kept wanting to work with him and vice versa.
It was something incredibly powerful in his presence, even there. And he wasn't famous or nothing, but he immediately, when he started to talk, and he didn't talk too much, all other people just stopped talking and watched at him. And he had this natural kind of the authority and wiseness that I understood that he's really the leader of the generation.
What helps him mostly his international career. He just got many rewards for his documentaries, and somehow it was not so easy for Polish authorities to stop him to do the next movies.
You know, I think that was extremely strong feeling of the conspiracy between the audience and the filmmakers in this time, and the audience was very grateful, extremely grateful. If we try to tell something about the reality or about the history, about our feelings or about the system, which they knew and didn't know officially, they loved us immediately.
We did try to build a language to criticize the system in a metaphorical way. So something which let us pick what we would like to say, building a special language together with our audience,
It was not really the easy movies, and in terms of the subject matter, and also in terms of the style.
They were open for any kind of hint, any kind of hidden criticize.
And in some way, this game with the censorship had something quite exciting, and especially that we felt that we are fighting the right battles.
Christopher was very famous, having a lot of pictures being put on shelves by Polish censorship. And he was a kind of hero because he was probably the #1 to being punished by communists then.
And actually now when the fight was won in some way and you have the political freedom in Poland, I think that the people are much more confused and unhappy. I'm speaking about the filmmakers, and that the audience is much more lazy also.
System change and the certain kind of the serious cinema making is not important any longer for the public.
On the one hand, Kieslowski denied that he was a political filmmaker at any point, really, in his life. In fact, he was always pretty skeptical of the political process. He was reticent to discuss politics in any meaningful way. But it is impossible not to see him and his work as integrally connected to communist Poland, post-war communist Poland.
I think that most of these directors could have had the chance of being very politically involved in their films. And he was in his documentaries to start with, but in his first features as well. But slowly, the themes of his films were no more so politically engaged than humanly engaged.
I remember him telling, I never dream and I don't want to dream and I would never go to work abroad. It was one of his promises which he later on break, as many of the others, because I remember him speaking in the school that he would never ever touch the fiction movies, that he's documentary director and he would stay to be a documentary director and he doesn't want to do anything else.
He wrote a thesis in 1968 that ennobled nonfiction filmmaking. You would never guess, either from his thesis or his early films, that he would become the creator of these magical fictional realms like The Double Life of Veronique or Three Colors. It just wasn't visible. But Kieslowski, just like the child traveling 40 different times moving, he was open to new things, and this includes an artistic sensibility. He ultimately veered completely from the documentation of the real life around him, from the curious camera that was recording rather than creating, into increasingly internal and poetic ways of seeing and telling stories.
He just made Kieslowski films, and they weren't really like anybody else's. They became more and more complex, more and more sophisticated. They were just developments of his own earlier work, really. You can trace back the trilogy to the films he made before the Decalogue, even. There were many common elements and many themes repeated, but he was just refining them over and over and over again.